let's continue to work with text and paragraph formatting. So here we have the text that we brought in the previous video, and we'll zoom in to have a good look at it. Remember, I'm holding the space bar to position my view, and the selection tool has to be the tool you're on for that to work. Let's go to the type tool, click to put our cursor in, and let's get rid of some of these paragraphs. There's just too many paragraphs for my taste, obviously. There we go. And I don't know if I want any space to my paragraphs. I think we'll go with just indents. So remember, use Control A to select all. And we will remove the space after paragraphs by nudging down to 0. There we go. Now let's go back to the selection tool, and let's make these columns a little more slender to get the look we want. And to make this the same size as this one, we can utilize some of the information available to us in the control palette. So we're still on the selection tool. We've selected the second column, and we want it to be the same size as the first column. So click back on the first column, and let's see what its width is. Its width in inches is 3.06. So let's make it even just for the sake of ease. We're going to delete that and make the width 3 inches exactly. Then we can click over here to this column and also make it 3 inches. Perfect. And if you wanted to do the same to any other columns, if you wanted to continue that look and style, this one almost is anyway, but will be exact. Exact looks professional. And then let's make it exactly the same distance from the internal gutter here of the page. I'm just eyeballing it right now, but we can check that later. Perfect. I'm going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard to subtly move incrementally any item I've selected. Looks good. Okay, so we've got our first line indents, and we want to continue on with a few more paragraph options here. Let's look at hyphenation. So go back to the text tool, put the cursor into the text anywhere, and make sure you're still on paragraph formatting controls. Remember, you've got the choice of character formatting and paragraph formatting. Okay. We're going to do a Control A or 5 clicks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to select the entire story. And let's have a look here. Hyphenation. So this is a checkbox to simply turn on and off hyphens at the ends of the lines on the right side. Now, hyphenation is pretty important to achieve good full justification. This clean edge is very difficult to achieve without these hyphens. Some people dislike them, don't want them. If you select all and turn off hyphenate, you'll see that there are no more hyphens. Oh, wait. But if you deselect, just by clicking anywhere, you might notice there's a little bit more work that has to be done to get the words to fit perfectly on both the left and the right. Not bad, though, in this case. So I think that's a good choice to turn off hyphenation in this case. Okay, continuing on, let's look at a couple of these other options. If you did, for whatever reason, want to indent a particular section, such as a few lines of text here that you wanted to be indented per se, keep in mind that there is I'm going to get rid of the first line indent. There is an ability to, of course, indent something on the left or the right. This allows you to quickly create a pull quote look or something of that nature. So if you did want to have some kind of hierarchical structure that you wanted to be reflected in this way, you could use these indents. I don't use them very often. I like putting separate text boxes for such things so that you have the creative control to adjust them subtly and creatively. But you can do it. Let's get rid of that all together. Perfect. So with the first line indent removed from this paragraph, we can now make a drop cap. If you don't know what a drop cap is, well, we're going to make one so you'll know. Let's put the cursor back in that paragraph if it isn't already there, and locate this right here, drop cap number of lines. And this setting should be at least 2 before you see the results. And if we all go to 3, then you can see that you have a large letter A at the beginning of your story. The 3 refers to 3 lines high. 1, 2, 3 is the size of your drop cap. And a drop cap is generally used at the beginning of an article to let the reader know that this is the start of a new story or a new section, a new chapter. It's a really good way to indicate that. It's very common. It's stylish. We're very used to seeing it in a lot of magazine layouts. You can also drop cap more than one letter. So you could drop cap an entire word and maybe bring it down a little bit. This is the entire word after 5 letters drop capped and 2 lines high, 1, 2 lines high for size for the drop cap. That's kind of a cool look. You do see that sometimes, but for our purposes today, I'm going to nudge this back down to 1 and bring the drop cap number of lines to 3. So it's how many lines do you want the drop cap to be high, and how many actual letters do you want to be drop capped. Now, if this was another if this was another section or the beginning of a new part of a larger article, you could put the cursor in here, and you could also drop cap, more than one section of your story. But generally speaking, drop caps happen at the beginning of a whole article or big sections of a very large story to indicate a new section. Let's continue to play with our drop cap by moving over to the character formatting controls again. So remember, you have the choice when you're working with text to switch between paragraph and character formatting controls. Let's switch back to the character formatting controls. And just to have a little bit more of a stylistic bit of fun here, keep in mind that if you block select your drop cap, meaning just drag the mouse over it to block select just that letter, you could choose a different typeface, a different font just for that one letter. Let's try this one. Very cool. Let's have a look at that. So that's neat. Now you can make a few tweaks here, and that'll allow us to learn about some more of the finer tuning settings that you have available to you in the character section here. Let's put our cursor between the A and the T of after. Now you'll notice that the A is a little low on the top part, and this is really dependent on the font you've chosen for the A. But for this font, it looks a little low compared to the top of the F and the T of the word after. And it could be a tiny bit too close to it. Not that much, but a little. So one of the other powerful things in InDesign is the ability to subtly tweak the relationship between the distances between letters and to tweak the placement of any particular letter or group of letters on the baseline. And I'll explain what a baseline is. First, let's see if we can put a tiny bit of more space between the A and the letters near it. You'll find this under something called kerning. Kerning is right here, and it's got nudge buttons. If you just do a nudge, you'll see that the 3 lines of text are being nudged away from the A. Not too much now, just a little, but it does help a little bit. You can do this to any 2 letters. You can nudge space between the U and the C here, and you can get rid of it, of course. But keep in mind that kerning is to change or tweak the relationship between any 2 letters, and we might use that again in a little bit. Also, we'd like the A to come up a little bit, so how do we do that? Well, if you block select the A, you can use baseline shift. Now, baselines are unseen lines that exist. I'll zoom in for you, Control++. Baselines, whether you see them or not, they are there. The computer uses these as the sort of line that the letters sit on, and their placement is in relation to it. So I've got these 2 guides that I've moved in here to show you what the baselines are, and we can talk about guides later on. But we want to change the relationship of this large A to its baseline. So we're going to block select the A, and we're going to look for this baseline shift. And we're going to use the nudge buttons to tweak it up just 1 or 2 notches. Perfect. So that has played with it a little bit in its position to make it look a little bit more comfortable there. Perfect. So it's time to bring in the other pieces of text that we need for this page, for this layout, and that's the heading and the byline. And also we'll bring in the deck, the introductory chunk of text that we looked at. So let's zoom out a little bit, Control minus minus. You have to click on the screen, of course, and zoom out. Okay, I'm gonna hold Shift, or sorry, the space bar, and move around a little bit. Maybe zoom out a little bit more. Perfect. Okay, let's do some arranging here. We're going to get rid of this text box for now, and we're going to bring this one over here and position it somewhere around here. Perfect. Maybe bring it up a little bit higher, make it a little longer. And let's bring in our heading and our byline and the deck and some other elements. So let's go back over to our Word document. Remember that we have a Word document. So here's our Word document. We've got the header to bring in, the byline, and the deck. So let's bring those 3 things in. Since we're going to have to do it in InDesign anyway, we're going to get rid of these quotation marks, and we'll copy the Control C to copy the heading, the title of it. And we're going to go back into InDesign and choose the text tool. And we're going to draw a relatively big text box and paste that in there, Control V. And don't worry about the size, we're going to play with that in a second. And let's bring in those other 2 elements. Let's get the byline, copy the byline, copy, drag that little bit of text into a text box. A small text box is fine for this. And back to Word, and grab the deck, all of it, Control C, and we're going to put a text box here and V, paste that in there. Perfect. So first, let's make sure we have consistency with our font. So we chose Tahoma, and remember we talked about how Tahoma only has regular and bold available, which means that we might not have the kind of flexibility we want. So let's reconsider that. Let's go back into our story here and select all, and change our font. Let's change it to something with a little more extensive font family. So let's choose Calibre maybe. Perfect. And we'll change our font back here for our letter. Perfect. And then we will do the same thing to our deck. We'll select the whole deck, put the cursor in the deck and select that. We'll choose the same font. You could choose a different font, but you want to be very careful about not having too many fonts in any one layout or design, and consistency is ideal. I make that small, bring it down to 10, and remember we increase the leading or the space between the lines a little bit. Looking good. We'll zoom in a little bit so you can all see that. Looking good. I'm going to choose for the byline. We're going to choose the same font for the byline, but we're going to maybe do a bold. As you can see, the font family is bigger, so let's do a bold for that. Perfect. Maybe for the deck, we could consider something like bold italic. Kind of like that. And now we can play with the header or the heading, the title, whatever you want to call it. This is where we can start to get really creative with our character options. Let's have a look at this. So I'm going to position ourselves over here a little bit. Perfect. And let's have a look. So let's make it bigger. Let's choose a 36, maybe. And let's find a font that we like. That's more of what one would call a display font. And we'll just look at a couple here. Something that might speak to us. This is not a good idea, for example. Let's choose, that's kind of nice, Callisto MT. And you'll notice that's a serif font, the little serifs. And we're using sans serif for our small body copy here. Let's make this maybe bold. Kind of like that. You don't always have to bold it, but I like it for this purpose. And let's position it. For the sake of good housekeeping, let's now resize our text box to fit or suit the size of the title. And we start to play a little bit with positioning. This is the real joy of desktop publishing, is just getting all your elements in and starting to position them. Let's put the byline underneath here, something like that. I like it. Now, you may find at this point you're starting to be distracted by all these little blue boxes, and don't worry, these boxes would not show up if you were to go to print. So how can we see a preview of how this will really look when we go to print? Well, there's two things to do. If you go to the View menu, you can choose Overprint Preview, which will give you sort of a look that is more like the actual print version, but at times it can be confusing because if you have text boxes, for example, with nothing in them, and they're not selected, you can see it now, but click over here, there's this text box here which is going to mess up your design or cause you some trouble maybe, anomalies, weird little things hanging out that you don't know they're there. But it is there, it's completely invisible. If you, under the View menu, turn Overprint Preview back off again, you'll see that anything that's there does remain slightly highlighted by a box. You don't have the handles and the anchors and corners and whatnot, but it still stays there. So it is a useful thing to keep Overprint Preview off, because you can at least see all the elements that are on your page and not miss one. So let's delete that, for example. One other way you can quickly view what your work looks like and then return back to this more helpful view is to use the letter W, the key W on your keyboard. Now, this does not work when you're typing because it would type the letter W. But if you're not typing, if you don't have a cursor in the text, you can use the letter W to quickly view what your page may look like. So, for example, with this view, I'm thinking that I have to change the look and feel of this deck because I don't like how it's aligning in some places and not in others. So, based on this view, I'm going to reposition the deck a little bit, and I'm going to bring this in so that it's off on both sides. And I resized that because as soon as I got too small, you'll notice I got my red plus. And this is when that little red plus indicator in the linkage handle is helpful. This is warning me that I can't see all the text, that it wouldn't all be readable. Make it a tiny bit bigger, and it goes away. Perfect. So that's looking a little bit nicer. I might go over and up this way. I might go over this way, move this over here. You can just see that in this view, you can really play with your layout to see what's working for you. It's looking good. Nice. Okay, so so far so good. It's looking like we've got a good layout here. We've got text, we've formatted it, we've addressed the majority of the settings that we have available to us with text. There's a couple more small little adjustment tools here that we can use. They don't get used as often, but they are worth addressing, so at least you know they're there. So let's, before we finish with text formatting, just visit them. So zoom in quite closely with your on your heading or your title, and it's with the larger text work that you may find yourself using some of these final settings. What have we talked about? We have talked about baseline shift. Baseline shift allows you to choose a letter or letters and change its relationship to the baseline, as you can see. You could use this for a very creative and artistic sort of a custom designed title or font fun that you could have. We have talked about kerning, which is right here. This will change the relationship between individual letters. how close they are to each other. You can even go into the negative and have them overlap. Not good for readability, but you can see that there are some creative things that you could do. We haven't talked about this. This is tracking. Tracking is sort of like kerning, but applies to entire sentences, entire words. You have to select an entire section to apply it. You can apply it to an entire story, and it is a useful tool. Tracking will affect subtle changes between each and every letter and word. If I tweak this down, look at the result. I'm nudging it down. Notice that it's bringing all of the spaces a little closer, shrinking the relationship between letters and words until the point when it's not really readable anymore. But that's extreme. In a subtle adjustment, it can be used to make text fit a little better, such as the deck. If I wanted the deck to be a little smaller, I could tweak it ever so slightly. -20 doesn't really make it too much more unreadable, but -10, for example, you could still read that. You could get away with it. You can see that things get denser. It's a little harder to read, but you could squeeze the deck into a smaller space. Okay. You could also make it bigger. You could make it a little bit into the positive. It puts more space between the letters. Now, this really comes in handy. This really comes in handy when you've got a large story like this, and it just doesn't fit into your article. If you wanted to get a little bit more space, and you selected the entire thing, and then reduce the tracking, you can actually fit the story into a much smaller space. It's extreme, it'd be hard to read, but a little adjustment of -10 or -20 can actually make it fit into a much smaller space and still be, for the most part, readable. It's important not to abuse it, but a little adjustment like -10 can make the difference in fitting those last couple sentences into your layout without having to change your design options or choices. Okay, so let's go back to our first page here, and it's starting to look sort of like a magazine. So we've talked about just about all the introductory options that are available. There are a few more that involve stretching letters. If this T, for example, if you wanted it to be a little bit more of a statement with this T, you could do what's called scaling, make the T taller. You could make the T wider, and this is referred to as horizontal and vertical scaling. You may find the need for this. And you can also skew it, which is sort of like a fake italics, but it is not the same as italics. It is skewing, a little different. So these are options that you may encounter some use for, but for the most part, we've discussed the majority of the basics when it comes to working with text. So in the next video, we'll start bringing in some graphics, photographs, and making some shapes and lines and whatnot.